Okay, so the question is, what is consciousness? You all know what consciousness is. Consciousness or conscious awareness is everything you are aware of while you are awake or dreaming. That would be simply what it is. What you see, so I include here what you see, what you hear, what you feel, and most especially your own inner private speech. And everyone has that private speech. Even people that don't speak, that use sign language, they have private speech. So brief history. I've been interested in consciousness since I was 6 years old. That's another story. But one was not allowed to talk about it or think about working in consciousness for a very long time. 1980, the study was still taboo. By 1987, nevertheless, quite a few wonderful neuroscientists had gotten into the study, and I have their names over here. And in 1990, fMRI was invented. That's functional magnetic resonance imaging, where you can see actually where the thinking is going on in the brain, and through that, consciousness study became a science. All of these are terrific people, really amazing. The model I'll be basing on is that of Bernard Baars, the first one over here. The two models that come up are Bernard Baars and Giulio Tononi, and I'll be speaking just about the Bernard Baars one here. So the question is, can machines be conscious? I believe it should be possible to build a machine that experiences consciousness and, more generally, free will. And you'll see, no randomness required, no quantum physics required for that. And pain, not just the simulating pain, but the actual torment of pain. Joy, the joy of discovery. The machine is to really experience qualia, like the color, red, the ache of pain, and so on, not just simulate. But pain is important because to understand the problem that we're dealing with here, I'd like to distinguish between simulating versus experiencing. I want to distinguish between insensitivity to pain, where you just don't know that you don't feel the pain. Something's wrong with the nerves, perhaps, and you're not getting the pain signals. And indifference to pain, the possibility that you get the signals, you know that something is burning you or damaging you, and yet it's okay. The sort of thing you sort of wish when you were a kid that you could sort of turn on, but you can't turn on. There are people who have this, who are like that. They have something called pain asymbolia. It's a condition in which pain is experienced without unpleasantness. Pre-existing lesions of the insula, which is a very interesting part of the brain. You see, you pull apart this part of the brain, and look, there's another brain in there. Pre-existing lesions of the insula may abolish the aversive quality of painful stimuli while preserving the location and intensity aspects. They can tell you where it is. They can tell you its temperature. This is getting too hot or too cold. Typically, patients report that they have pain but are not bothered by it. They recognize the sensation of pain but are immune to suffering it. Mostly people get this because of some damage to the insula, but some kids are born with it, and they don't generally live very long. After a few years, they damage themselves. Okay, so here's the outline of the talk. I don't expect to get through all the way. Examples of conscious versus unconscious thinking, so we're just talking about the same stuff. This wonderful Bernard Baars global workspace model. I've read as much as I can about the actual neuroscientist work as his global model that I'm particularly going to talk about here. My own Turing-Machine-like model is a model based on Bernard Baars, and I would like to call it the conscious Turing machine. And then I'll talk about how these models generate consciousness, motivation, free will. You should, by the end of this talk, be able to understand what free will. I may tell you some amazing stories about people with injured brains and possible applications to the design of conscious computers. Today's New York Times, September 18th, has a picture of basically this kind of stuff saying that we want to understand how computers, how the brain works, because we're trying to put it into a machine. And but anyway, so okay, so let's hear some examples of conscious and unconscious experiences. I cannot go through all of this. The first one is important here, and I'll come back to that. You have had the following experience. You go to a party, you encounter somebody. I know that person. What's his name? You start talking to other people, you get a bite to eat, you take a drink, and then all of a sudden it pops into you, Stefan, that's Stefano. But how did that come up? Where did it come from? The point is that you are consciously aware of asking the question. There is computation being done in your brain. Parts of your brain are looking for the answer, and when they get the answer, they forward it to the conscious part of your brain. There's interesting stuff about the dreams are conscious. You can look up gorilla. It doesn't matter. Learning to ride a bicycle. The sighted world. There's this is absolutely. There's something called blind sight. Have you heard of blind sight? It's wonderful. Did you know that there's a blind sight 1 and a blind sight 2? Oh, look it up. It's very interesting, the two kinds. But basically, in the sighted world is the world that you know of. The blind sight world, the person is blind, doesn't know. So you ask them, well, look, I want you to walk across the stage. Don't hit anything. Well, I can't see. Nevertheless, the person, just keep your eyes open, and the person will walk across the stage. It's absolutely amazing that even though they cannot consciously see, as long as they keep their eyes open, they are seeing. Here's some more stuff. I like the one about the baby that has control. Have you ever seen a baby in the crib that is sort of, it looks at its hand and it knows it can control it, and then maybe it discovers that it can control its foot. It's really wonderful, but it also notices it can't seem to control the mobile. That's saying, the baby is learning what it can and can't control. And it will come out of the model, just what is going on here. Other stuff, the Necker cube, I want to get to that. This is the Necker cube. It's just a cube, but Necker pointed out this very important property that some of you are seeing it facing in one direction, and some of you are seeing it facing in the other direction, right? There are those people who see it this way, and there are those people who see it that way. See, that's going up that way. Oops, and that's coming in. What Necker pointed out is that you can see one, you can see the other. If you work hard at it, you can see both at the same time. But basically, most people cannot see both at the same time without really working at it. You like that upside-down house? It's in Moscow. When you look at this photo, you get the sense that you see absolutely everything that's there. It's pretty clear. I want to make the point that's important for consciousness, that what you see that seems to be clear is what you can be conscious of, not what you actually are conscious of. It looks like you're conscious of the whole thing, but in fact, all that this means is that you can, if you want, look up there and see that there's a bicycle upside down on the house. But you can be conscious. Consciousness just tells you what you can be conscious of. If you actually, there are some people who don't have that property. They have had damage, and they see the picture as it really is. And this is the picture that they see. That's the fovea. And if they're looking at the E over here, you can see exactly what it is that they are seeing. But your brain makes up a fiction for you that you really can see the whole thing. So my view of consciousness is that consciousness is a property of all properly organized computing systems, whether made of flesh and blood, which we are, or metal and silicon. My job as mathematician and computer scientist is to use the experimental evidence provided by neuroscientists, the neural correlates of consciousness. I love the neuroscientists. They are finding out what part of the brain is responsible for what, the neural correlates of consciousness. And the model provided by neuroscientists, the Baars model, to create I would like to use these to create a formal Turing machine model of consciousness. And it's a model that, once understood, should give you an understanding of of consciousness, free will, and the various emotions of love, joy, pain, and so on. If I don't succeed in this, it's my fault, not yours. The fundamental extraordinary idea for explaining consciousness due to Baars. Okay, so Bernard Baars describes conscious awareness through a theater analogy. Oh yeah, this is wonderful. So he views consciousness as the activity of actors in a play. Usually just one actor, like me. Here, see, I'm on a stage. Consciousness is the stage in which these actions are occurring, and the audience of unconscious processors is sitting in the dark. Each processor is knowledgeable of and concerned primarily with its own unique specialty. And then each is in close contact with others. You're sitting next to, Stefano is sitting next to Mike. You see, they're in close contact, and they can talk to each other. Each is in close contact, and the processors, however, are unconscious. Okay, so here it is. This is the Baars theater of consciousness. You sometimes get a few more than one actor, but this is, when you talk to yourself, you are up there on the stage talking about what's going on. You have this sense that there's a little person inside of you how can you have you inside of you and that you has another you inside of you? These are the kinds of problems that used to bother the philosophers. This will be taken care of here because what's conscious is just what's on the stage. That's it, just what's on the stage. And it happens to have the possibility of having an actor which represents yourself. Here is Bernard Baars' model of consciousness, and you'll see that mine looks rather similar to it. Vision coming in, here's where you can move your arms, your legs, but not this other person's legs. Working storage, a very small memory here. This is what actually you are conscious of, although he puts the consciousness here, but I put it over here. The central executive, which is the finite state machine that Turing was talking about. You know, Turing machines have a finite state machine and a tape. That finite state machine, that's the central executive up here. And then all of the unconscious processors down at the bottom. Okay, so what accounts for consciousness? So let me say, what accounts for consciousness? I'm going to show you that, modern computers, the modern Titan computer has in it 1.8 times 10 to the 18, times 10 to the 18 transistors. The brain has 1.5 times 10 to the, did I say 18 or 10 to the 15? I think it's 10 to the 15, one or the other. They're just about exactly at the same point. Damn, where am I here? Let me, you're not supposed to see this yet. There it is, somewhere it's here. No, not here. Somewheres I talked about. Oh, there it is. 10 to the 15. Oh, well. The Titan supercomputer has 1.7 times 10 to the 15 transistors. I view the transistors being more or less like a synapse. You know, a neuron is like a whole processor, but the transistor, synapse, they're somewhat equivalent. I'm seeing them as having both about the same number. And so let me go back. And the point is, I don't think the Titan supercomputer is conscious at all, but because it's not built right. It was not built to be conscious. That to be conscious, you have to have the right organization, and that's what it's the organization that I want to get to. Okay, let's go back. Hold on. You keep your eyes closed, you don't see any of this. That's right, there we were. What accounts for consciousness? A tiny, short-term memory. That's the stage. You know, George Miller said that we can hold in our conscious 7 plus or minus 2 chunks. He never said what a chunk is. A chunk is a digit or a letter or a word. It could even be a poem if you've memorized a poem. He never said what a chunk is. I will tell you what a chunk is. It comes right out of the model. A chunk from this model, it comes out as just a pointer. And that pointer to some neuron in the brain is how I will define chunk. So there's this tiny short-term memory, an enormous long-term memory. The important thing is that the contents of short-term memory, what you see on the stage, that's constantly broadcast to the long-term memory, the huge audience of unconscious processors. What's broadcast is, what's his name? I know his name. What's his name? And when it comes back, well, some people will say it's Mike. Other people will say it's John. No, but the one that eventually comes to the fore is the one that knows the answer. The processors negotiate among themselves to decide what actual information to send to short-term memory. You don't see all that processing going on. You just suddenly pops into mind. Stefan, okay? Here. Why isn't this working? There I go. Okay, so my conscious Turing machine. Okay, so let me also say this. My conscious Turing machine is a simplification, a real simplification. I am talking, for example, just about one short-term memory, one long-term memory. I've had neurophysiologists come up to me and say, well, you know, short-term memory, there's several different kinds. I'm looking for the simplest possible model that will enable me to explain consciousness to you. I want to have the model. I want to be able to prove theorems about it, you know, do what a mathematician does. Okay, well, I'm really delighted to learn about our brain. My real interest in this talk is consciousness. Okay, so if my model isn't exactly right, I'm trying to get a model for consciousness. For example, and here's part of the reason. I would like to be able to say which animals or machines are conscious. Is a dog conscious? I'm quite sure that dogs are conscious. If you've ever seen an octopus open up the lid of a glass jar to get to the crab inside, you will begin to think, there's something going on. If you look at our robots, they don't seem to be conscious. I don't believe that they are conscious, but I'm going to claim that they can be. And, okay, so that's what we're going to be doing there. I am looking for a minimal machine model sufficient to explain consciousness. Here is my suggested definition. Okay, I'm starting at the top. A finite state machine. A Turing machine would be the finite state machine and a tape on which you can, just as Lenore had shown, on which you can print and erase zeros and ones, and you can shift the tape left or right, and you can keep on doing it. And you can compute anything that's computable that way with such a Turing machine. This thing is not able to compute any more than a Turing machine can compute. I'm not trying to, that's not going to be possible. What's possible is to make it be conscious, and that's what I want. And so first of all, let me get into this finite state machine part. It has in it, just like any finite state machine, states. States, well, here's, see, I'm trying to show you a little piece of it. The state has the content of that very small short-term memory. And what that has, remember George Miller saying 7 plus or minus 2, pointers, chunks, these chunks are pointers to neurons. And there are 7 roughly pointers to long-term memory in each of these. And this finite state machine will take you from a state which has the particular things in short-term memory, the particular chunks, and on an input from the world, an output to the world, and the next state. That's exactly what the sort of thing that Turing was doing. And here I'm showing you actually that short-term memory. So here's Baars global workspace. It's this greenish yellow, small short-term memory. It's the thing that it's the only thing we are conscious of. It is this, well, we have a little bit of the conscious of the input, even less so of the output, but this is basically what we are conscious of. Mathematically, I define that to be conscious. I will give you a machine, and I define this to be what is conscious. And then we have these unconscious processors. That's you people in the back there. And there's a processor for example, faces. There's well known, we have some fusiform face area in our brain that is knowledgeable of faces. If you lose that, you don't recognize your own wife or husband, or you don't even recognize yourself in the mirror. It's amazing how. But these people who don't recognize those faces, they are still conscious. They are conscious. So this is a processor that's not absolutely required for consciousness. We're going to go through some of these. There are some processors that you do need for consciousness, some that you don't. Here's a processor with its memory for speech. And this is really a kind of shorthand because we have more than one. We have this Broca, we have Wernicke. It doesn't matter. We have processors for speech. We have a processor. But this is a very interesting one. This is the cerebellum. Fine control. Over half of the neurons in our brain are in this processor, that one processor. And yet, some people are born without it, and they are perfectly conscious. They're kind of clumsy. They learn to walk at age 7 instead of age 2, but nevertheless, that's the cerebellum. There are processors for fear, anger, hate. It's wonderful to learn about these, but they are not absolutely necessary. There's a woman who's 32 years old, has 3 kids, does a perfectly fine job taking care of them, but her amygdala is calcified. She does not have any fear. It's a processor for fear, this amygdala. She feels no fear. She has never felt fear. She doesn't know fear. She's careful crossing the street because she knows she doesn't want her kids to get killed, but she's not afraid of anything. It's kind of funny. Okay, these processors keep on going. The processors can talk to each other, just like two of you can talk to your neighbors. I won't go into that. Just the gray will always represent unconscious. Here's a very important part of the model. Anything that goes on the stage gets broadcast to everything down below. You see, I am broadcasting to all of you. You all are hearing what I am saying. That's broadcasting, okay? This is very fast broadcast. Boom, you all have it. It can go through a network, but you can get to the depth of log n, you can get to n processors. You can go exponentially wide. You can get to a huge number of processors with very small depth in this network. Okay, so there's actually one like this from every chunk. 7 chunks, seven broadcasting trees down to the bottom. It is only within the last year and a half that we have an idea of where in the brain is this short-term memory where this broadcasting is occurring. I'll tell you some more in a while. To get back up, that's harder. It's harder because, one person thinks that the name is Stefan, the other thinks that the name is Mike. They come to some node, they have to agree amongst each other, Stefan goes up. And it keeps on going. The information you're looking for gradually gets up to the top, but it's slower. It simply takes longer, and that's part of the reason why it takes a while. Okay, so the conscious Turing machine, so that's the model. That's the model. There's the short-term memory, that's what we are conscious of. All the rest we are not conscious of. Okay. Let me show you some of what goes on into trying to get to try to take care of the details of this model. There's this finite state machine. Bernard Baars calls it the director. It's behind the stage, directing what's going on. Okay, so there's this director, the finite state machine. Let me just point out something about it. So I'm going to look at the finite state machine of our brain. I'm saying that the finite state of our brain, the finite state machine of our brain has approximately 10 to the 80th states. That is a lot of states. In fact, that's the number of atoms in the visible universe. That gives you an idea of what that number is, 10 to the 80th states. And how do I get that number? Well, there are 10 to the 11th neurons in the brain. And I view each chunk as a pointer to a neuron. Okay? So when you see me, that's a pointer to some particular neuron in your brain. Each chunk has 10 to the 11th states. That's the total number of neurons it can point to. George Miller's magic number says there are 7 plus or minus 2, about 7.2 chunks in short-term memory. And if you do the math, the finite state machine has 10 to the 11 to the power of 7.2. That's approximately 10 to the 80th. That's the number of states in the finite state machine. When you look at these models in books of finite state machines, you know they have like 3 states, 5 states. Minsky's universal Turing machine, I think, has 32 states. You don't need very many states to have a universal Turing machine. This has 10 to the 80th states. And in fact, this was very bothersome to me when I first noticed, because how can you you can't show this finite state machine. How can the brain actually say for every state and under every input what you should do next? How can that possibly be there? Until I realized that as big a number as it is, you can have a very tiny CPU with just 33 bytes of memory. We'll have 256, that's the number of bits in a byte. And with 33 bytes, you have 256 to the 33rd, that's 10 to the 80th. So the right way to describe the conscious Turing machine is not with a finite state machine, but with a small CPU and a small memory. That's enough. With that, you can actually describe what this thing is doing. So we're replacing the conscious Turing machine. The conscious Turing machine is got by we're replacing Turing finite state machine and infinite tape by a very tiny CPU, a tiny short-term memory, and of course this long-term memory, which is very large. Configured, very important, configured as I showed you. Okay, here's the sort of stuff that's really interesting for me to do. Which of those long-term processors are necessary and which can you do without? It's kind of fun to go through this. And how do you even argue for this? There are these red ones which I say are necessary. I will not go into it. There are 2 reasons for saying they are necessary. You need to have inner speech, this business of talking to yourself. And that could be, a bat could be talking to itself. A dog can be talking to itself. It will not be using our language. It will be using its language. You don't have to actually have language. It's inner speech. It's how you talk to yourself. Self-awareness, you need to have the actor up on the stage that represents you. And motivation. You need motivation. You can't do without it. It's the understanding the model that tells you that you must have this. Understanding the model by itself, I can go through it and tell you how you need this, but I can also point out, and it's just beautiful, that there are people who lack lots of processors, but the ones that I know of that are conscious all have 1, 2, and 3. And so that's kind of confirming. I don't know about this, whether procedural memory is necessary or not. But the blue, that's easy to show too, because you know about HM? Henry Molaison, well-known person. They had an operation, they took out part of his hippocampus, and after that he could never create any new memories. What he had from before, he had. But he couldn't create new permanent memories. You're looking like you have a question.
Yeah, is that what the movie Memento is based on?
I never saw it, so it might be. Is it?
It's about a guy who can't create new memories.
Yeah, that would be right. Okay. HM was like that. HM, whom we now know, it's just been a couple of years that we know his actual name, Henry Molaison. Anyway, so yes, he could not create new memories. So you don't need to have to be able to do that, to be conscious. He was fully conscious. You come in, you can talk to him, you'll ask your name, you'll have a nice conversation, you go outside, and you come back 2 minutes later, and he doesn't remember you. You can introduce yourself. There was somebody who studied HM for a very long time, studied for years, for decades actually, and every time the study began, come into the room, introduce herself. And this happened day after day. He could not create those memories. Language for outer speech is not necessary. There are people who don't have language for outer speech. Who still are able to talk to inner speech, but they don't have language for outer speech, and they are fully conscious. Arithmetic, emotions are really interesting. In every one of these cases, we can find somebody who is missing the processor. I've just mentioned the one for fear. Missing that processor for fear, for example, you can see it calcified in the brain. They do not have any fear, and they're fully conscious. Don't need to have them. I'm really interested. This is just the beginning of trying to understand what is absolutely necessary and what is not. And so here I go through. How much time do I have? Probably not that much. I should be asking you, how much time do you want? Okay, so for poor people. Okay, so need to make plans. Inner speech. So here's how. There's this Alain Moraine Science and Consciousness review of 2003 called In Inner Speech and Conscious Experience that starts with the following. Imagine that scientists have been successful at designing a drug that freezes brain areas producing our internal monologue, our talking to ourselves. After taking the drug, you can't talk to yourself anymore. Every other mental activity is fine, but it's now total silence in your head. Not a word. What would happen? What would it be like? And basically, he's arguing, because there have been people to whom this has happened, that Moss, this particular person, exists, but he was not conscious that he existed. And there was no way he's simply not conscious in any reasonable way until actually it came back, and then he could talk about this very strange experience where he could not talk to himself. And he existed at the moment and just could not look into the future. Self-awareness, awareness of self. Self is up on the stage. You have in your head yourself up on the stage. You know, when you want to see if you can move your arm, as a baby, you see you can move your arm. Well, up on the stage, you're finding that. That's how you know that the arm is yours. You can put a light bulb on the stage. You can try, I've tried many times as a kid, make the light bulb switch on. Tried to do that? Switch on or switch off, and you can't do it. Try as you might, you can't do it. That's how you learn that the switching the light bulb on and off is not part of you. Well, self-awareness is really important. It's how you find out what is you and what is not. And the model requires that you have that self-awareness. It's very interesting. So in checking this out, I looked into Alzheimer's people because they gradually lose a lot, right? And I discovered that, so this is a quote, evidence suggests the persistence of awareness of self into the middle and late stages of Alzheimer's disease. As long as they are conscious, they have an image of themselves. It's also kind of interesting to see what other animals have that. And there are mirror tests that help to decide this. Anyway, these animals include orangutans, chimpanzees, gorillas, bottlenose dolphins, who can look at mirrors, elephants who can look at mirrors, and orcas, bonobos, rhesus macaques, European magpies, a wonderful bird. Dogs and bats are not on this list. They probably should be. But, you know, dogs, Most likely, dogs are not on the list. Most likely, I think, because they're not as dependent on sight as we are. And these tests for self-awareness depend on recognizing yourself in a mirror. Okay, so, by the way, anything I have in quotes is a direct quote from something, and now you have Google. You want to find out where it is, just type it in, or the main words, and you'll find out where it's coming from. So I haven't, okay. Other stuff. Do I want to go into this? Self-awareness. Loss of motivation, that's the third thing. You have to have motivation. You know that when they show dinosaurs in these wonderful movies, what do they want? They want eat. That's what's important. That's motivation. There's this wonderful thing that there are some people, well, we are motivated by many things. And there are some people who have our motivation to take care of the left side of our field of vision is separated from the motivation to take care of the right side. There's kind of the two different motivations for that. And it's wonderful that you can lose one of them, and these people are still conscious, but now you'll see that in some sense, they're not conscious of the left part where the lesion occurred. This is a model on their left, and on the right, you see a patient trying to draw what's on the left. And it's just wonderful. Look, this leaf on the left got actually put in. That's unusual. Mostly the patient has only put in what's on the right on the house, the right on the clock. Interesting, isn't it? Yeah, so loss of motivation. So we know that even when you lose that left, well, no. They are conscious because of the stuff on the right. On the left, they are not conscious. They are simply not conscious of what's on the left. That's why everything on the left is missing. It's called left hemispatial neglect. Neglect is the wonderful word that's used for this. The emotions, I already mentioned HM. HM had inner speech, self-awareness, motivation, and he could create new procedural memories. He just couldn't make new declarative memories. Procedural memories are the ones that I'm not sure whether you do need to have them in order to be conscious. Procedural memories, HM had procedural memory. You could ask him, this is beautiful, can you type? No, I don't know how to type. Then they would sit him down, he was going to typing lesson, sit him down with a typewriter in front of him and say, well, copy this text onto the page, and he'd be amazed himself. He was doing perfectly wonderful. He'd been taught to type. He didn't know how to type. He could do full finger typing, brrr, and he was amazed because he didn't know, he didn't have the declarative memory that he could do that. Here's SM that I mentioned, whose amygdala was calcified, and so she had no experience of fear. Here's another one, Caleb. You can just look up Caleb, emotions, and you will see all the stuff on this. There's a word for this called alexithemic. I remember because my grandson's name is Alex, but alexithemic. Caleb was alexithemic. These are people that simply, they don't feel any emotion. They don't feel love. They don't feel hate. They simply do not feel any emotion. But they are conscious. How does this account for consciousness? You don't know. You just don't know how the unconscious is actually working. You know you know about what's conscious. The unconscious long-term memory, LTM is long-term memory processors, respond to some but not all questions, requests, and commands. You know, it bothers me. I don't know, for example, I would like to want commands. You might think that what's the name of this person? If it has it, you'll find out. But I can command my processors to show me the world in black and white, and it won't do it. It refuses to show me the world in black and white if you actually see it in color. You can try some commands, it'll do, some it won't do. There are some commands, there are some which respond to some but not all. The explanation for the feeling that one has of pain, for example, is that when you have pain, the processor that's accountable for pain, for your feeling of pain, can force itself up on the stage. It's its ability to force itself. You don't have to ask for it. It will force itself up on the stage. You can't think about anything else. If it's really severe pain, you cannot think about anything else. And this is what makes pain, gives it that terrible feeling. You can only think about that pain. And it's interesting, you know, pain, fear, they're two different separate processors that are available for them, and somewhere along the way, if there's a wonderful story by Oliver Sacks, who confronted a bull on and he was out on some farm and saw a bull there. He got terribly frightened, and the bull started to get up on its rear. He knew that that bull would kill him. He turned around and ran for his life. He broke his leg. He kept running. He did not realize that he'd broken his leg until he got out of that pen that the bull was in. That's when he realized that he was in such pain that he couldn't even walk any further. That's it. He was stuck. A very interesting story of Oliver Sacks. So you can imagine fear and pain. And in this particular case, the fear won over. The fear said, "You run." And only when he was out of there could the pain get up onto the stage. The emotions of consciousness arise in part through processors forcing themselves onto the stage. Okay, here's the one where I'm saying that supercomputers are not conscious of the world, but they are big enough. So we are at the point where they are big enough. The cerebellum, by the way, has more than 50% of the neurons. I mentioned to you, humans born without a cerebellum can live a long, albeit clumsy life. Without it, they are conscious. And humans born with a missing left or right brain are also conscious. Here's some pictures. This is a picture of 24-year-old Chinese woman missing cerebellum. Resulted in only mild to moderate motor deficiency, mild speech problems, such as slightly slurred pronunciation. This, Jonathan Kelleher, has been living his entire life without a cerebellum. See? Missing. There's the real brain, there's the cerebellum. He's missing over half of his neurons. Conscious, perfectly conscious. See? Down here too, missing. It's not actually air, it's water. It's filling up that space. You know this person? Have you ever seen the movie Rain Man? That's him. His name is Kim Peek. That's the Rain Man. The Rain Man was named after Kim Peek. His brain is unusual too. He has a cerebellum, but it's very weird. It's small, it's damaged, and he had trouble there. He also has no corpus callosum, which is the tie between the left brain and the right brain. And so he could and did read one book with one eye and another book with another eye, and he was able to get twice as much done as we could because of that. Very interesting person. Here's a girl born with half a brain, perfectly conscious. Despite lacking one hemisphere, the girl has normal psychological function, is perfectly capable of living a normal and fulfilling life. She is witty, charming, and intelligent. Isn't that wonderful? I love it. What's this one about? How Baars and conscious Turing machine engineer consciousness. So in Baars' model, only a tiny fraction of the brain is conscious. Consciousness derives from the fact that the conscious fraction of brain broadcasts to all the special purpose processors of the brain. The reason you're conscious of what's up on the stage is that it's being broadcast to all of you. If there's anything there to make things conscious, it's receiving that information. Every single part of your brain is receiving that information. In the formal conscious Turing machine model, the short-term memory together with the input and output from short-term memory are defined to be conscious. it's very easy for me as a mathematician. I don't have to tell you how or why. I just tell you, this is what's conscious, the rest of it is not. And now I can go on to do my mathematics. Okay, let's see. How the model explains free will. Do you see how the model explains free will? You are up there. You are an actor up on the stage. Maybe you're playing a game of chess, okay? Actor up on stage playing a game of chess. You have to make a move. Now, this comes up all the time when you're playing chess. You have to move a piece. You can bring it down to you have to move either this piece or that piece. Which do you move? Well, until you figure it out, which piece to move, you have free will. You have the ability to choose whichever you find out will be the right thing to do. And you don't know how or what you will find out. And until then, you have that free will. So this is free will. The decision of which move to make may be important enough to merit a careful look at the immediate consequences of each choice. How to engineer a machine so it really feels, not just simulates emotion. Starting with pain, again, I already told you. The reason that pain has this strong effect on you, there's not just a simulation, there are many reasons, but the main point is that simulated pain becomes real pain when the machine loses control and free will, when you no longer have the choice of what to do on the stage, when that's decided completely by that processor that's responsible for pain. It's putting up on that stage what it demands to be put up there. And that's what's causing you. You see other things happening. Of course, some things like your finger pulling away from a hot stove, that's is automatic, but you might notice that you're sweating, you're vomiting. All things can happen when you have pain. Okay. We know, this is kind of fun. It's fun in games now. There's the brain, the thalamus, which is sort of the original brain, the cortex, which got constructed. The thalamus needed more brain, so it created the cortex for it. Here's the hippocampus. You know what the hippocampus is for? Well, it's for many things, but it's interesting that the cabbies, I love the London cabbies, they have to pass this test called the knowledge. And we know by looking at these cabbies in fMRI machines that their hippocampus has grown considerably from the time that they didn't prepare for the knowledge to the time that they finally were able to pass it. The hippocampus actually holds a map of, their hippocampus holds a map of London. It's just absolutely wonderful what the hippocampus does. And the amygdala at one end of it is what's responsible for fear. Okay, so I think getting close. How to engineer motivation. This is another thing. Oh, wow. So fears, like pain. And this is basically saying the same sort of thing, that, well, not quite the same. Fear is one source of motivation. Pain is another. But again, the motivation must come from somewhere. It must be to do something. And it could be to compose music, to prove a theorem, to discover new physics, please. To become famous, it's probably a good thing. It gets you moving. And our dinosaurs eat. That's what they want to do. So do we. Eating is really important. We want to eat. There's motivation to do that. We're finding out more and more where this comes from. There's this thing called the medial habenula, which just a couple of years ago, they found that in a rat, if they destroy that habenula, that the rat, which every morning likes to do some exercise, it stops. It's no longer motivated to exercise. It's absolutely wonderful. And that must be what happened to my habenula. How to engineer embarrassment, how to engineer joy. Here's the bibliography on consciousness. That's the end. Michael Behar's suggestions, I already showed you this. We have at home a lovely little thing, sort of statue. I just took a picture of it because it shows you the little person that we have in our brain. I wanted you to see the little person that we have. That's it.
So the schedule now has time for a chat by the non-existent fireside. We are running a little bit late. Could I just get a sense of, are there lots of questions from the audience? Because it would be far better to have lots of questions from the audience than, how many people have questions? I'm not asking you to ask them now. If you have a question, tell me. Okay, so that's a modest number. I think we have time for a little chat, and then we'll do the questions. Would you care to join me up on stage? Take a seat. Guys, please. Please.
Thanks.
So I have one question I'm going to ask you. I mean, people in the audience might imagine that we have the whole family from CMU on the stage today. but of course,
the most important one is not here.
Of course, your son Avram is also a faculty member at CMU. That must be really weird, having mum, dad, and son.
He got us jobs at CMU. Our son was professor of computer science, and they put us, when we came, they put us on both sides of him. And he put up a sign, Mom, Dad.
Yeah, it must be really weird. Yeah. Were there any interesting consequences of that? Did you?
Well,
yeah, a couple of things. So, you talked a little bit, because of women my age, working in the sciences, not very many starting out, and there were a lot of rules that were keeping women from having jobs. Particularly nepotism was a way of usually the husband. Many women scientists were married to some scientists who usually are a couple years older, so have a job before the spouse does. And so it was very natural for universities to have nepotism rules that two members of a family couldn't have jobs together. So when we started out, there was strong nepotism rules. And of course, it always worked against women. I never knew when it worked against a man. Anyway, so when Carnegie Mellon offered us positions, my son was a professor there already, it was really great because then the three of us would be professors at the same university, same school, same department, we're all theoreticians, same group.
Floor.
So, turning everything on its head. So that was a really great opportunity to be together and, really was great. And so it indicated some of the changes, and I think today many universities are aware of this and try harder to be more equitable. I don't think it's perfect yet, quite frankly, but changes. So that's...
Sure. But Avram's moving on to Chicago, I read it.
Yeah, our son is actually moving on to another, heading a machine learning school, institute.
Okay. So, the other thing I was wondering, you've both made wonderful choices about the research you've done over the years. How did you decide what to do? We have lots of young people in the Turing who are PhD students and research fellows.
I'll tell you how I said that I was interested when I was 6. I was a very dumb 6-year-old. My teachers told my mother not to expect that I'd be able to get through high school. I certainly could not. Don't even think of college. I probably wouldn't be able to get through high school. And I wanted to be able to think. I asked my father, I had to memorize these spelling rules. How do you do it? You just memorize them. Yeah, but how? I was really bothered by the fact that it didn't come with a manual to explain. Sure. And so I wanted to see if I could get that manual.
Yeah. And that's been driving you ever since?
That's been a big part of the drive.
Cool. Yeah.
Lenore is also part of the drive.
So I think since I was 9 years old, so Manuel and I are on sabbatical now, and for me this is my first sabbatical since I was 9 years old.
Okay.
And when I was 9, my family moved to a new place. They put me in a new school. Didn't like it at all. So I one day said, I'm not going back. So we actually just had moved to South America. That's where I actually met Manuel. So my mom said, okay, we'll just go around touring this new country, doing things. And that was actually a fantastic experience. And I know that other mathematicians have had an experience of either being sick and out of school for a year. Because when I went back to school, the first day they were doing some stuff in mathematics. Actually, it was like Euclidean algorithm. And I thought it was so interesting. And I was so excited to be back at school. I hadn't been bored to tears. So since about 9.5 or 10, I've really loved mathematics. So my whole life I have. And
the Euclidean algorithm.
It was, yeah. So never was discouraged from going ahead. Somebody asked me, actually, and I just want to answer this. They have 2 daughters, and how do we encourage our daughters? I want to tell you a little experience. One program I started actually many years ago, but it's big in the United States, called Expanding Horizons. It's a workshop for middle school girls. And the girls come and they have experience of seeing role models, women who are doing things in sciences, and then having a lot of hands-on experiences. And so, in fact, we were doing it at my school, and one of the workshops was these Lego logo things where you have to use a computer to design a robot, who can do very minimal things, but something at all. But I remember that, at some point, I was smelling a fire. And I realized one of the girls had put the leads in the wrong way, and there was like a short circuit and smoke and all that. So I ran over and got the battery, went into the ladies' room, and I was thinking to myself, my God, if some of the parents saw this, they would sue me, never let their girls back. So I come back into the room, and these girls are jumping up and down, and they're saying, this is so exciting, this is so exciting. And I realized that these girls had not been given the kinds of experimental tools that their brothers had been given, chemistry sets. They couldn't take apart computers, of course. They probably weren't even given computers. So girls were not given these sorts of things. So I think that's really critical. Daughters, make sure your daughters have access to all of these things. And I think people are more scared of their daughters, like guys can blow themselves up with chemistry sets. I don't want people blowing themselves up, but give those girls those experiences.
My own daughter learned Lego in prep school, but then she discovered horses, and since then it's all been horses.
But at least give her a chance.
Yeah. So, as in university life, we have to do lots of different things every day, at least for most of our lives we do. We have to teach a lot, and we have to do lots of management and make things work well. And of course, we get to do research. But is it the research you like best, or is it the whole academic package? What?
Well, I think we're different because of our experiences. We're different.
I like the research. I like the teaching too.
Yeah, and I think Manuel's
there's a lot more that has to be done. But at some point in the past few years, I realized I have tenure. I can do what I want.
So first of all, in the U.S., they don't force us to retire. So that may be a good or bad thing, but we are not retired yet.
Sure.
So, and I think being in the university, the one really nice thing is you're always with these, 18, 19, 20, 22-year-olds. You're always with young people. So you're always with this great group of exciting people. So I think that's one of the best things about teaching at a university is, and teaching at all, I think is great. In my experience, again, I've wear many, many hats. It wasn't my intention. My intention was always to just do research. But because of circumstances, I realized in the 60s, late 60s, 70s, getting more women involved in sciences was my political activity. So that became something that I've been working in for many years. So that I had to learn a lot to do that. So my research, women in STEM areas, but also more recently with our research, when there was government pulling back of funds for basic research. I don't know if I think Europe is not as bad as the US. I was heading our algorithms research group. I was co-heading that. And we had gotten a huge grant from the National Science Foundation, huge in the terms of people who just do algorithms, paper, pencil. Sure. And at one point, the and the government agency pulled out funding from all projects. And I realized, okay, we're doing things that algorithms, so we're looking at applications of algorithms. Why don't we just commercialize something like that? And naively, I thought, okay, and then we can bring funding back to our research group. Right. So that got me very involved in entrepreneurship. Yeah. And in fact, that's had a big effect. And now I'm sort of part of the startup scene in Pittsburgh, which is really reinventing itself. So I got pulled into different areas. So I think for me, because of circumstances, I started to do different things. That has its pleasure and its excitement, but also you can't be as involved. And that's why I'm sort of very happy to have this year off.
Right.
Sabbatical.
It's a year off in Berkeley. You're at Simon's.
Berkeley,
yeah. It's a great place, isn't it, Simon's? I was there in December.
Well, so far they haven't asked us to do anything, so we can just do our work.
Yeah. Well, it's been a huge pleasure to have you.
We had some questions.
And we have questions from the audience, yeah. So hands up if you have a question. Gentleman there was first. Yeah.
So thank you very much, both of you, for coming and talking. While you're here, is there somewhere you'd like to go and see, somewhere particular you want to go?
We're really glad to be here in London. We're about to go off to Surrey to give some talks there. So our host there will.
Is that
Yeah, so when I was at Cambridge in 2012, I went to Bletchley Park, which was really fun, and I understand that you're doing a lot of exhibits here, and I would have actually enjoyed seeing some of them, but this time around we don't have the time to do it. But so thank you for asking.
There was somebody just behind, yes.
Is this guy in front?
I'm curious, with your model of consciousness, if you consider the complexity of it, is it required that you have artificial general intelligence first?
See, I didn't talk at all about the unconscious processors. And those unconscious processors are able to do a lot of things, a lot of very intelligent things. I don't know how, I'm trying to find out what is absolutely necessary and what one can do without. Is it necessary to? I haven't.
But that's a good question, because complexity is certainly informed algorithms. So when Turing started out, and for many years, logicians were just interested, if they knew a problem was solvable, decidable, that was enough. So they were interested in whether something was decidable or undecidable, and they didn't care about complexity. And in fact, if you notice that the theory of complexity got developed mostly in the burgeoning computer science departments in the 70s, not by logicians. Logicians are working on it now, but not early on. Maybe the similar thing, that complexity will change the character of what you're thinking about. And of course, you're a key person in complexity.
But he's asking this great question of, do we need to have that artificial intelligence, as I understand it, be an important part? Do you have to have it, otherwise you don't have consciousness? I don't know. It's very great. It's a great question. Thank you.
Okay, gentleman at the front.
Yes, I just want to continue on the artificial intelligence. I'm involved mainly on discovering. Sorry. I'm involved on discovering innovative startup at the territorial level.
Discovering what?
Innovative idea at territorial level in order to create jobs and economics. So I see many similarities of what we try to do. So my question is, first, the consciousness and non-consciousness. Can you say that it's better to talk about evidence and not evidence? Now, the not evidence can be related with the concept of what is going on now on big data activities. So how from the big data you can get evidence, and therefore how you can, let's say, discover innovation. Now, this relationship, let's say big data or artificial intelligence, evidence, and discovering that are linked to each other, I do apply in economic terms. This means, for me, it's very important to create economic growth and jobs. That's why, for instance, we applied completely strategy in Europe that we call smart strategy specialization, where we can try to link all this type of ecosystem. I would like to have a comment. Thank you.
So you're trying to relate my husband's work on consciousness with my work on entrepreneurship and economic development. Okay, that's novel. So I am interested in fact, the role that the research university can play in regional economic development. That's been a big thing. But you're sort of saying, can I model that using my husband's model of consciousness? Again, another interesting idea. We'll think about it, talk about it. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, so two quick questions. When you were saying
Unconscious.
is that the same as saying subconscious, or is there a difference?
As far as my model is concerned, no difference.
And then my second point was, you said alexithemic, having no emotions whatsoever.
Oh yeah, alexithemia.
Alexithemia, yeah. How do we have motivation if we don't have any emotions? So if we have none of those processors for the different emotions?
Yeah, it's interesting. Nevertheless, he's motivated enough to get married, Caleb. And he says, I never loved her, but my life is better with her than without her. It's a wonderful question. How is it possible to have motivation with no emotions? Apparently it is possible, because he is motivated. There are people who lose motivation, and there was one who lost motivation. You could get nothing out of him. He seemed to be completely dead. He came out of it eventually, and he said, yeah, I heard your questions, but I wasn't motivated to answer them. I heard your questions. I could have answered, but nothing in me demanded that I answer them.
So is there some sort of like internal reward system other than motivation, other than emotion? Because when you achieve something good, you feel happy, get that dopamine rush. So now if you achieve something good.
This person, Caleb, who is alexithemic, yes, he doesn't feel the emotions, but he nevertheless finds it worthwhile to do his work, to get married, to have children.
Okay, gentleman in the middle with hand. Yep, then the gentleman behind, then two people here, and one person over here.
Thank you both for very interesting lectures. One of the observations, and I'd like to probably comment on this, is that using your model of consciousness, I remember back in history, people talk about the character of a country, character of a polity. Could you use that model to analyze the character or the way an organization behaves? I mean, because in a sense, like for example, in a polity, you will have people who are equivalent to the consciousness, maybe the parliament or whatever, or you might be the central politburo or whatever. And there's an interesting analogy there, isn't there?
Yes, there is. I have not thought about that at all. I just think about this. I'm not thinking of applying it elsewhere, but both economics and here politics. Very interesting. I haven't thought about it.
Okay, gentleman behind the mic.
Fascinating talk. Just a question to Manuel about your model. Assuming that you had the resources and capabilities to put them all together and you actually ran it.
Who's talking? I can't.
Right here.
Oh, yeah, hi.
Yeah, hi. How would you know that your machine is conscious? Do you have a scale, like a GCS or something?
I didn't get into Giulio Tononi's theory, where he does, in fact, have measures of consciousness. And it's very interesting because even though he is a neuroscientist, he really knows his information theory. When he talks about information, he is talking about it in a technical level, and he has a technical way to measure it. But I didn't go into that. That's another talk. Sorry.
Okay, there were two questions down the front here. Yeah. So,
Should I wait for the mic, or should I?
it's coming.
There's another question there. We have one back there.
Yep.
So I actually have two questions, one for each speaker. Is that all right?
Please.
Well, thank you both for coming. First, one of the things that I saw was interesting was when you were talking about the patient that lacked self-speech, He was able to use many sub-processes, but your slide said he was incapable of foresight. Why would that be?
That's what he said. That at the time that he had this problem, that he couldn't, he was not able to say in words what he would want to do. Now, a dog, and I do believe dogs are conscious, can nevertheless say to themselves, I want to meet that dog over there. And this is pretty clearly going on. And they can do much more interesting stuff than that, too. But, you know, I was talking about inner speech. I don't know what the inner speech the dogs use, but I'm sure that in order to be able to carry out what they want to do, they must have some way of explaining it to themselves. Some way of saying, I had a dog at home that was loved by everyone. And we let it out in the morning. It would stay out all day, would come back at night. This dog was much loved and got killed by a car. And about a month later, I heard a knock at my door. A knock it's a knock at the door by a dog. This dog had come to my front door and was basically saying, may I come in? He didn't use English, but it was clear he was asking to come in. So I opened the door and said, please come in. And that dog went from room to room, I know, looking for my dog. He didn't say, but I know what he was doing, and he saw that my dog was not there. And then, satisfied, he went back to the front door and asked to be let out. He had to have thought this thing through, thought what it wanted to do. It wanted to see where, he knew where my dog lived, and he wanted to pay a call to my dog. He had to think it through in dog language.
Can I ask my second question?
Sure.
This is for our other speaker. Part of the reason why I got into computer science was because my older sister was a software engineer. Oh. And one of the things that one of the things that I want to know is that when I discuss the topic of gender representation in the field of computer science, one of the things we look at is at other industries that also had historic biases, but that seem to have leveled out. So medicine, law. And I would be curious to know, what do you think is still missing that is preventing equal gender representation in fields like computer science?
So, right.
I wonder what's missing in Saudi Arabia that the women aren't allowed to drive cars.
Right. So I think in many of these things, so for example, the image of the doctor being a helper, there weren't images so much of women doctors, but that was sort of like more in our society, something that in fact, it's sort of surprising women weren't doctors. And in fact, I think in the former Soviet Union and China, you did have many more women doctors. It wasn't thought of, there was a hierarchy. Again, there weren't women surgeons in these places, so there was a very structural hierarchy. By the way, I was thinking that my husband's theory of consciousness, I don't think is a good model for the organizing societies with having one person up here and all this around. I mean, so we'll talk about that area. So to go into to computer science, you really need to have some background, first of all, to have the STEM background, to have some motivation, to have it viewed as an area having role models and an area that you might want to go to. So I think it's not an area that young girls particularly think of as appropriate for them. They haven't seen people like themselves. They don't see it. They may not have the background, so they may not have been taking apart computers since they were little and really seeing that. So I think that is a big difference. What other things? Well, I guess you've been reading about Silicon Valley. In our school, we have a very equitable, in computer science, it's not so general, but in computer science, we work very hard and I can go into details on what we did there. And so I am concerned that, our students are, both men and women, are in great demand by these companies. And I am concerned that we're preparing them enough and I think they are the few women who are doing well, but they're going into fairly hostile environments. So I think those environments have been recently very, very hostile. You know, there were more women going into computer science percentage-wise in the 80s than there are today, actually, and there's a phenomenon about that as well. And, you know, there's the movie about, a recent movie, and the original computers were women, the people who were programming. When they discovered these pictures of women at the computers, many people thought they were just models. No, they were people who were really doing the original programming. So the idea of women being significantly involved was not part of the common scene at all, if anything was the opposite. So I think those things of the role models, the mentors, having those connections were really critical. I think your situation is totally unique, your story, being influenced by your sister to go into the field. I think that's not the case generally.
The gentleman just behind her.
So, she was, okay.
Thank you both for your talks. I really enjoy both of them. I only have one question. What constitutes speech in the internal speech? Is there a minimal grammar that you need to have something called speech?
Yeah, so we have, of course, examples of people who don't actually have speech as we have it, but use sign language. And we now know that they do have a grammar. It's not quite the same as ours, but they have a grammar for their speech.
Probably sheep and dogs don't have the same grammar.
Well, we don't know. Or at least I don't know. I don't know what. It's a funny thing about us with animals. We expect them to learn our language. We don't try to learn their language.
Okay, I think there was a question. Yeah, other side. And perhaps just one more question after this, and then we'll be out of time. Right?
Two more. There's one, and here's one. Right.
Hello, thank you very much. Why haven't we built a conscious machine yet, or have we? And if not, when?
So I don't think it's a question of size. I think it's a question of organization. We need the kind of organization that I'm talking about here. And I'm hoping that with arguments and stuff, you know, I still have to write some of the stuff down. I hope that with arguments, we'll be able to get... I did have somebody from ARPA come. They wanted to know what I thought about how machines should be designed. They are interested in having conscious machines. They are. And as I mentioned, the New York Times, September 18th, today's New York Times in particular, does have a picture of this brain, which is really made out of transistors, and mentions the fact that people are considering now building these machines along those lines. These are very different ways from what I was suggesting is a very different way of constructing a machine than what is currently done.
Okay. Is there one more question to the gentleman towards the back?
Hi, thanks for your talk. I was wondering, what do you think about the neural networks model to find maybe any parameter that you would need to implement your short-term memory and long-term memory? And in your model, you have motivation, but I guess you need to input what is exactly the motivation, right? And once you input this, in order to the agent, for it to find a way to attain his objective, do you need some kind of reinforcement learning framework? Sorry.
Yes, so it's very interesting to ask how you get motivation. And the main point I was making here was that there are processors in us that are responsible for getting us to eat. And if we start to get hungry, they force themselves onto the stage and they don't let us think about anything else but about how to get food. And I think that the motivation is coming from processors that are able to force themselves onto the stage. No matter what we want to think about, we can't because these processors force themselves onto the stage. And the stage, of course, then every processor sees what's going on the stage, which is what makes it conscious.
Okay, I think we'll wrap it up. Thank you again, both of you, for your astoundingly good talks and for taking so many interesting questions and giving so many interesting answers. It's been a great pleasure for the Institute to have you here.
Thank you
very much indeed.
Same
Appreciate it.
here. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.